It's Sunday, May 16, 2021. This is episode 187. Should I sell my house, cash out, and rent? 39.6 Facebook and YouTube Live Finance Show. Happy Sunday, everybody. This is the show that teaches high earners like yourselves how to make your money work for you so you don't have to work for your money. We talk general investing, taxes, real estate syndications, Airbnb, paying for childcare, paying for college, and even the car you drive. Today's episode, question from a Facebook group. Does it make sense to sell our house in this crazy market, rent for a few years, then buy in a better school district when housing cools off? There's limited inventory in my area. Houses are selling in hours for over ask here. Zillow and Redfin have my house almost $200,000 more than we purchased for 6 years ago. All right, so this is a really good question. I think a lot of people have similar questions because the real estate market right now is just super hot, and how long is this going to last? Well, let's just go through some of the objective things. Okay, so you bought a house 6 years ago. It sounds like you're married and have kids, and they're going to be going to school or are in school already. And you bought this house 6 years ago. So if it's, let's say, $200,000 more than what you bought it at, and I don't know what you bought it at, but let's pretend you bought a $500,000 house that's now worth $700,000. Now that is definitely different than a $1 million house going up to 1.2, and also very different from a 200,000 going up to 400,000. Okay, so that percentage increase is really important to kind of gauge kind of how much appreciation you've gotten and maybe could get in the future. For example, if it went from 200,000 to 400,000, well, it's doubled in that period of time. It's very, very unlikely you're going to get that kind of appreciation, market-based appreciation, again in another 6-year period. Things don't double twice in 12 years. At least markets in general don't do that. Just market appreciation, not forced appreciation. If it went from like 1 million to 1.2 million, then that's a 20% gain over 6 years. That's not that big of a deal. That's about 3% per year. Okay, and so, yeah, that is appreciation, but you could continue holding on to it and still probably get that kind of appreciation over the long haul. Okay, but let's pretend it's 500 going up to 700,000. Then that's a $200,000 gain. That's up from 500,000. That's a 40% return over 6 years. That's still a pretty good return. That's probably 6% annualized per year, 6 to 7. Okay, so in that situation, it makes it a little bit more challenging because, yeah, you could potentially still get those kind of numbers over the next handful of years. But on the other hand, you could very well not get that kind of appreciation over the next handful of years. Okay, so let's pretend you're in that situation. It's really kind of it's not an easy decision really one way or the other. So from a tax perspective, if you sell your house now and you take $200,000 off the table and you cash out. Now, when you cash out, remember you have to pay commissions, okay? Easily 6%, 3% on each side if you're using a realtor on both ends of the deal. And then there'll be other costs, holding costs and costs in terms of getting the property ready for sale potentially, okay? It's really easy to consider about 10% of your home value getting lost in the transaction. Right now, things are moving really fast. Okay, let's say 8%, okay, depending on how much work you need to put into it or want to put into it. So let's pretend it's gone up to $700,000 from 500, and you're going to spend $56,000 in transaction costs. So then instead of being up 200, you're really up only $144,000. Now, that difference between what you bought it at and what you sell it at minus expenses is going to be a capital gain. Now, since you, and it sounds like you're married, have both lived there as your homestead for more than 2 years, all of that capital gains will be tax-free. Okay, that's the homestead exemption on capital gains. You have up to $500,000 of capital gains on a homestead that you lived in for the past 2 years that you do not have to pay any tax on. Okay, so it's kind of like a Roth IRA in a sense, in that you have a certain amount of appreciation that will not be taxed. And you can do this over and over again every 2 years. Okay, now, so you're going to end up making, let's say, netting $140,000, and that would all be tax free. So that's great. Let's just pretend in 2022, they will change the long-term capital gains tax rates. Okay, let's pretend they go all the way up to your marginal tax rate plus the NIIT. That could be up to 40.8%. And let's pretend, and they're looking to get rid of a lot of these real estate loopholes. They could potentially get rid of the homestead exemption. I don't know. I haven't heard about this, but they have to raise tax revenue somehow. And so some of these tax breaks, it's a lot easier to take tax breaks away than to change the brackets for everybody. People don't like it when you increase tax brackets. It makes it look like you're raising taxes, which it is. It's a lot easier to pass getting rid of exclusions. So that's something to think about. Okay. Now, you can get out now, get all this tax free, and then rent. Okay. Now, I'm assuming you can find a place to rent, and the prices that it is right now to buy versus the price to rent, because prices to buy have gone up so much, prices to rent in general have not gone up at the same amount that prices to buy have. Okay. They're separate markets. They are somewhat related, but they are different from each other. I mean, you're competing with people buying single family houses when you're looking at pricing to buy. And if you have a shortage of supply that drives up the price to buy right away, that shortage of supply in terms of rental properties does not necessarily, it's not necessarily the same shortage of supply, right? There's a lot of apartments you could potentially live in. There are probably a lot of tenants who weren't paying during COVID who are eventually going to have to leave, okay? But in general, I don't consider your own homestead as an investment because it costs a lot of money out of your pocket and a lot of negative cash flow out of your pocket. You're spending money on your house that does not get otherwise put into investments. And in general, the houses that high income people buy would not make the best investments from a pure fundamentals standpoint. Now, you can definitely make money when the markets go up. That's the market, right? But if you're holding onto a property and it's an expensive property and you try to convert it to a rental, you're often not making money. Okay, so for a lot of people, it financially actually makes more sense to not have that liability of a house on your books and just to pay money for rent. You know, when you're paying for a mortgage, you're paying a bunch of money to property tax and interest, even though it's deductible to an extent. Those costs are unrecoverable costs. The same way that if you're renting, those are unrecoverable costs. Okay, the main benefit of owning is that if the market does appreciate, you can capture that. But on the downside, if it goes down, that can hit you as well. And you have to deal with all the potential liability of owning the property, all the damages and repairs. Okay. The other big benefit of owning is that, well, at least you have control of the asset in terms of, okay, I want to live here for the next 10 years. You can't necessarily rent a place and guarantee you could stay there for 10 years without moving. A lot of people hate moving, but that also often comes at a cost, right? So if you are completely liquid in terms of where you live and you could live anywhere at any time, then renting what you need, potentially renting what you want to a degree that is still cost effective and often is, you often come ahead by renting because those same properties don't tend to make much sense to own as a rental property. So one person is tending to come out ahead financially, either the owner or the tenant. And if it's not a good investment property as a rental, then it probably makes more sense to rent than it does to own. Okay. Now, you talked about moving into a different school district or a better school district in the future. Okay. So now this is where it gets a little bit more complicated. So you actually have an impetus to move. Okay. So if you have no desire to move school districts or your house, buying and selling and then rebuying later, that is a lot more challenging a situation because you can't assume that prices are going to drop. Okay. It's gone up in a surge, but it could very much just flatten out for a while, for a long time, and just not appreciate the way it was. But you can't time the market and expect it's going to go down. Okay. But you do mention that you're considering going to a different school district and buying later. Well, if you go into a better school district in general, prices are probably going to be higher for the same property type, okay, with the same features. And so now you would potentially be buying a more expensive property in the future at higher prices. And so this brings me to like the third benefit of owning a property, which is that you are basically, you're not getting yourself, you won't get yourself priced out, okay? Because you're getting it in early. If properties only went up in value, financially, it makes sense to buy a property as soon as possible because the longer you wait, the more expensive it is. So it gives you that chance to buy earlier. Now, again, it could go down, but you can't depend on it going down. And what if you sell, sit and rent for a couple of years? Now, that same house you want to buy in the nicer district is actually $1 million, and you just sold your house for $700,000. So now you have to buy a much more expensive house. That other house in the school district currently might be $800,000. So you could be sitting on the sidelines and other properties are going up. But you don't necessarily, again, have to buy in that other district. You could rent in that other school district if you want to get into the school district. It does make a lot of sense for a lot of people if you like a public school district to move in there and rent. And that's how we rent out our other half of our duplex. The market rate over here right now is north of $7,000 for a 4-bedroom rental in this school district. There's not much inventory to buy. There's a lot of desire to get into the school district for the school year. But at $7,000 a month, inclusive of a house and property tax, and the property tax bill is like $20,000 a year. If you have multiple kids, that is in general going to be a lot cheaper than paying for private school for all of those children. Like our tenant next door, they had 3 kids and they lived in the school district. They cashed out and they have 1 kid left and staying in the school district just for that 1 kid to finish the school years out and stay in the public school district. But then they plan to leave the school district. A lot of people will rent in the school district just in the years that their kids are in the school. So for example, they might do it just for high school, or they might do it for middle and high school, or they might do it for all years. Some of the private schools here will cost north of $20,000 per year. And so, if your property tax bill is $20,000, that's equivalent. 1 property tax bill of $20K to 1 tuition of $20K. If you have 2 kids and you're spending $40,000 or more on private school, that's a lot more than your property tax bill. And frankly, if you had like 3 kids, and some of the private schools, let's say, are $25,000 a year. So then you're paying $75,000 a year in private school tuition. Renting out the house at $7,000 per month for the whole year, $84,000, and that's a nice 4-bedroom house. That total cost out of pocket is not much more than the total cost out of pocket of the private schools. And I'm not trying to compare the private school to the public school in terms of value, but just from a pure numbers perspective, it can be super cost effective to rent in a good school district during the years that your kids are in school. If the alternative is spending a lot more money on potentially private schools that are quite expensive. Okay, so there's a lot of things to think about here now, and they're not necessarily directly related to each other. So like, do you want to move into the other school district? Yes or no? If you do want to move, then you're going to move at some point in the future, right? If you are planning to move in the near future, next handful of years, then it may very well make sense to sell now while you have the chance to get out tax-free at a good price that you're happy with. And sure, rent a place, and you could go to the new school district now or later. You never actually have to buy. You could just rent a place now for the next few years. And then if you want them to go to the next school district when they get a certain age, move over there at a certain time and, manage that situation liquidly in terms of you're not locked down into one area at any given time. And, your life needs are different at different times of your life. Like, if you have toddlers, you may want to rent a single family house that is like one story, as opposed to maybe your kids are in high school and you'd rather have a 2-story house. You may want to have a yard when your kids are toddlers, and you may want to have a pool when your kids are older. And, by renting, you can just choose what you want to rent whenever you want to. And certainly, there's not necessarily infinite inventory when you're trying to rent. You can't just get whatever perfect house you want to at any given time. But in the same way, if you're trying to buy a house, you don't just always have the perfect house to buy. And the transaction costs to buy and sell housing are very high. The costs of renting are so small in comparison to that. Like if you're dropping $50,000 just in transaction cost to unload this house, compare that to how much rent that would last you. I mean, that could be easily a whole year of rent, depending where you're living, including the property tax payments, which would include public school payments. So those transaction costs are huge, and those go into the pockets of the realtors, right? So realtors are going to push you to sell and to buy. That's how they get paid. That's their conflict of interest. They're not your fiduciary. They're not your fiduciaries, right? They are supposed to look out for your interests and represent you legally in a transaction, but they're not necessarily fiduciaries. So, when a realtor takes you around, you're gonna give them a price range, and then they're gonna try to get you to buy the house 10% higher than the top of your price range. Like that's what they specialize in. That's how they get paid more to do the same work. And if you could always get paid more for the same work, you would try to do the same thing as well. And people often are happier buying the nicer house because they're happier with the house they got, but that's at the transaction time. Then they're dealing with the costs over time, and they might not be as happy about that. But anyhow, that's the reality of how it is. Now, you could always list by yourself, do a for sale by owner. You could do like Redfin, where they only charge like 1% commissions. I don't know the exact structure in your area or what it is currently, but they used to be at 1%. And as long as it gets onto MLS, I mean, there's so many buyers out there, they're going to come. And if you offer the buyer's agent a 3% commission, they're still going to bring their clients there. If you give them like a 3.5% commission, they're going to be even more incentivized to bring their clients there, 4%. And then you could still be under 6%. A seller's agent, the value of a seller's agent right now is not going to be nearly as high as it is in a time when it's a lot harder to sell a property, right? You don't even need to have something go onto MLS. You can just put something onto Zillow, for sale by owner. I guarantee you there are going to be people who find you because they are on there nonstop looking for properties. I mean, I have a filter that looks for properties that were listed within the past day, and I check on it every single day. And a lot of individuals are going to find properties before their agents do, because their agents are working with a lot of other clients trying to buy properties, and things go super fast. So a lot of things to think about. Those are a number of them, and I wish you the best in your decision-making process. All right, that's it for today's episode, 187 already. Facebook user says, you could just do 3.1% and probably beat the market going rate. I don't know if you're referring to a commission, but I don't know if you can set commissions like that. But if in terms of your investing your money, then compared to interest rates, I mean, if you invest money over time, you should probably get more than 3.1%. So I'm not sure what the question was exactly. But yes, if you offer a buyer's agent commission, north of 3%, north of 3%, you're going to incentivize them to bring people there. So like when they have their buyers and their buyers are saying my price range is $500,000 to $700,000, they take your house at $700,000, but yours offers a 4% commission, they're going to push them to buy that house. All right. Have a great day. Until next episode.